Hello, everyone. My name is Charlie Hubbard, and welcome back to the Profiles Podcast. It's definitely been a minute. I thought I was going to be done with this whole podcasting thing after high school ended, but it turns out it's such a cool tool that enables me to have really interesting conversations with really interesting people and sit down and have like an hour and a half conversation with someone I really admire. So I'm going to keep doing it, and hopefully, I can provide value to the audience along the way. In today's episode, I'm interviewing Professor David Kosbie of Carnegie Mellon's School of Computer Science. I was lucky enough to take his famous class, 15112, last semester, and I kid you not, it changed the way how I think, changed the way how I learned, and it changed the way I interact with the world. Professor Kosbie is an incredible all around human being, one of, if not the best teachers I've ever had. The way he goes about teaching his students and actually caring about his students' learning is unbelievable. And I hope that at least this conversation can somewhat capture a little bit of his amazing abilities to interact with his students and to share and improve the world. I recorded this interview over 2 months ago, but I still find myself thinking about what we talked about, especially about how he defines success and his thoughts on teaching. I think that his thoughts on teaching and engaging with the world can resonate with people, not just in academia, but around every industry. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation. It's the first of its kind to my knowledge. Professor Cosby doesn't do social media. I think this is one of his first actual media appearances, if you'll even call it that. But I'm really lucky to be able to have spoken with him and capture his brilliance in an hour and a half long podcast. So I really hope you enjoy, savor it, and take tons away. So without further ado, here's the episode. I've heard through the grapevine that you're a morning person, and that means very early in your case. Do you want to talk about what mornings mean to you?
Absolutely. It's a good question. And first, I am, although to be accurate, I'm only a morning person because my wife converted me to that. Prior to marriage, my best hours were probably 2 to 4 in the morning, but like many of my students, right? Um, but now I'm very much a morning person. I usually get up at 5 o'clock, and in a practical sense, mornings are a time when I can take good care of myself. I work out in the mornings every day. And it's a really good time to get stuff done because there's uh, no one to bother you, to interrupt you, no one to say you must do this at this moment. And so much of the day is spent chasing the urgent that often don't have time to think about the important. And morning is my opportunity to own my agenda. The other thing that I love, is almost every morning I spend at least an hour outside. Okay. And usually it's just I go outside before dawn and I stay out until after dawn. And I dress up warm and I even have an outdoor heater if I need it. And I just love listening to nature wake up. We live in a nature preserve, and so there's lots and lots of animals and birds around, and it's just I think it's very easy in our modern world to forget that we are simply elements of nature and to be out there and part of it. I know that sounds waxing philosophic or whatever, poetic, but it's just a moment I treasure in the mornings. I do sit out there and work. I don't just sit out there and opine, but it is a lovely part of my morning.
So that space to pause, I know you haven't always had that in your life. I remember hearing a story from college where you worked really hard, you were grinding and burning the candle from both ends, and I'm just curious if you could take that point and kind of jump into a story off of that because I know it's not always been a consistent part of your life.
I can, okay, and, you're touching on something of a maybe even a sore point. I mean, like, I used to naively believe, as many of my students still do, that the way to solve any problem was to simply try harder, and so I would take really hard courses. At least I did this my freshman year, and, I was pre-med back then, by the way, uh, and, I would stay up, all night doing one set of problem sets like physics. And then the next night, all night doing my chemistry problem sets. So that I'd literally have back to back all nighters. And the idea was just I could fix anything by staying awake and trying harder and digging deeper. And that worked until it didn't. And it didn't decay. It didn't like slowly fall apart. It collapsed like a bridge collapses. And it was just utter collapse. And so signs were things like I woke up one day, I was on a Peter Pan bus line, and it was in northern Vermont heading to Canada. And I just had no idea, none, how I got on the bus, what I was doing there. And, that's not a good sign. Okay. And while there's some comedic stories, to tell you the truth, there's nothing funny at what's underlying this, because I eroded my health to the point where I had to spend weeks in the hospital. I was tearing at my academics to the point where just utter destruction in my courses. I was tearing at friendships, actually. I was tearing at everything that mattered to me. And the irony, I was doing it in the name of helping it. It was supposed to be making everything better, and it made everything dramatically worse. I wound up the year on disciplinary probation, which is not great. And obviously, there's some stories there which I might not fully share, but I'll just say I deserved everything I got. And I learned the hard way. Oh, by the way, I actually, at the end of that year, thought very hard about dropping out of college. I had thought that I'm not made for college, or maybe college isn't made for me, and I'll just go find another path. And it's not like everyone in my family before me went to college. My brother was the first one in our family to go, and my family wasn't even thrilled that I was going to college, especially across the country. But I had a dean, Archie Epps, who it was tough love that he gave me, but he wasn't just like, "Oh, you can do it." I mean, he beat me up pretty bad, but it was out of love, saying, "You're doing it all wrong, and if you keep doing it wrong, you might as well leave." But there is another way. You can change your attitude, you can change your approach, and you can do it right, and you can care more about yourself. You can care more about the people around you. You can be balanced. And you can care about your academics, but show it in a different way. And it turns out his model was the better model. And things improved dramatically after that.
Do you think that that kind of philosophy where if you have a problem, the last solution, or I guess the solution you'll typically go to is just to work harder. Do you think that was kind of instilled in you in childhood through any certain things, or like in your family, or do you think that was just like the way you were wired?
It's a really good question. I definitely had a very happy childhood, very caring parents raising me. We came from lower middle class. We were not poor. We always had food to eat. I always had clothes and a bed. So like, it wasn't poverty, but it was just above that. We lived in a row house next to the highway in Chicago, and all that that entails. Um, so I think it did not instill in me a toughness, to tell you the truth. It did not. It instilled in me a joy to love what you have and not worry so much about what you don't. Like like we didn't have much, but gosh, were we happy. The thing about a row house is there's lots of young families there. And so there's lots of kids. And so I grew up in an environment where there're just a bazillion kids, and there's a park a half block away. And since no one had money, no one was traveling, and no one had stuff, we all just went to the park every day. And honestly, that was a gift. And even as I went on in my life and turned out to have some income and be able to buy stuff, I never valued stuff. I always valued people. And in terms of though the toughness, I don't know if that's even the word. Maybe I brought it in here. The willingness to push myself. I think that was a weakness, not a strength. It was a crutch, and I developed it in high school more than anywhere else because, like most people at most strong schools, back in high school, I was smarter than most of the people around me. That's not bragging. That's true of you. That's true of everyone at CMU and everyone at every top school. Okay. And so I was just very used to doing well. On the couple of occasions when I didn't, right? It was just easier to just compensate with time, which always worked in high school. And so I learned that I self-taught. That's how you do it. You just try harder than the next. Plus, I think sports had a lot to do with it. Um, sports was very important to me growing up and to my family. And I was born sort of an athlete, but not completely an athlete. And so, like, the real athletes just had this natural stuff that I'd never have. And but I was still kind of athletic, and I had to catch up to them with just sheer effort. So I just tried way harder than them. And so that reinforced the idea that that effort is the answer. Of course, effort's not the answer. For instance, I wanted to pitch baseball in college, and maybe at some level, maybe I had some talent to do that, but my arm was just not it kept getting injured, torn rotator cuff and so forth. Plus, you know, you go and you watch the real college pitchers, the real athletes, and you're just like, "Oh, okay, that's what that looks like." So, never mind that, backing up to the grit, for sure, that's how I made varsity, baseball and football. I just worked harder than the people to my left and right, and that's where I learned that's how you do it, but it's not a good lesson. It's actually not true. Hard work is a virtue until it's a vice.
So if you're saying that it's kind of a crutch sometimes, then how, if you have like a complex task or problem, do you suggest that people tackle it if it's not just sheer effort?
It's an You're asking good questions. Um, so the answers are severalfold. The first thing is, uh, don't put more on your plate than you can do. Period. Uh, so that doesn't mean don't try to go to the moon. We went to the moon, right? Don't like you could do great things, but you're going to have a team of people to do great things. So the next thing is resources, and that's time and people. Okay. And maybe when you're older, money, but time and people. And so you have to make sure you have enough time. If something's going to take you 20 hours, don't commit to getting it done today. Give yourself now, you might push kind of hard. That's okay. I like hard work. You know, Andrew Carnegie's quote, "My heart is in the work." I mean, I very much believe that. In fact, we may get to it, but it's the only way I know how to teach. Like it's through volume. Okay. Honestly. But but you've got to still eat, sleep, socialize, exercise, take good care of yourself, and be a good person and be a good friend. And if you're not all those things, over time, you're going to erode and all of your goals are going to be unattainable. So time management. The other thing is resource management. And CMU students, for what it's worth, although I don't know if we're only talking about them, um, they're especially weak, especially as freshmen, at both of those. Time management means doing today whatever is due tomorrow. And resource management, well, they view using resources often as weakness, that you can't do it yourself. And the irony is using resources is strength. Okay. When you look at the most successful people, at least from a business or scientific perspective, okay, but from a business perspective, you can rattle off the names. All of them lead armies of people doing what they want, right? Achieving their ends. None of them are working alone on anything. And yet somehow you get this idea that the way to achieve greatness is by just suffering in silence in my room, which is just not true. It's the opposite. So you're limiting yourself. So the key is use your time wisely, use your resources wisely. And then the last thing would be reasonable about what your actual goals are. Okay. And you can't, if you treat everything as the most important thing, then nothing is the most important thing. And so you have to keep balance and understand your priorities, because often it's the most sensible thing to do to not do something amazing on a piece of work, to do good enough, because good enough by your definition, not mine, because good enough is by definition good enough. And then save your stellar work for when it matters.
Now, if we could just transition to your time in industry. So you go to undergrad and then you start working straight into industry, I believe.
No, that's not the
No.
path.
Okay.
I'm more than
Okay.
happy to share the path.
Yeah. Can you tell us about the
Yes.
path that you chose?
Sure. So to begin with, as I mentioned, was pre-med. Okay. I had put a lot of careful thought into that, as in none whatsoever. As a child, I just wanted to be someone who could help people and who was, respected. And so I decided brain surgeon. And I was maybe 5 years old when I decided that. And I just, for the rest of my life until I was 20, when people ask you, what are you going to be? It's just brain surgeon. So that's the thought of a 5-year-old. So 5-year-olds don't always know what matters to them. And it's maybe a separate conversation, but I came to terms in college as I completed the pre-med that I did not want to actually be a doctor. So in my senior year, I had already taken the MCAT practice course. And on the day of the MCATs, I just didn't go. And so that's how I made my decision. And I sat there kind of numb because I realized, okay, I'm really not going to be a doctor, which, by the way, took my parents years to get used to that idea because they had this crazy idea that all that money they spent on college was so that I would become a doctor. And I had to tell them, no, that's not what's going to happen. And I don't know what is going to happen. Okay. So that was fun. But anyway, as I did a little personal inventory, I realized two things. First, I love to teach. I taught like as a TA during college. And I took 5 or 6 computer science courses along the way. I took them as electives. I took them completely out of order. For instance, I took compilers without any of the prereqs for compilers, which I wildly disadvise. um, but I loved all my CS courses. Those are the courses I taught, by the way. And it just turned out I was good at it. Okay. So like I always tell my students, for when you want to think about your future, there's a Venn diagram. There's the stuff that you like, the stuff you're good at, and the stuff that people will pay you for. And you want to find something in the middle of all of that. And it turned out it was just blatantly obvious to me that computer science was that thing. The only problem was I didn't have a degree. I didn't even have like a cogent set of courses. I had like a smattering of 5 or 6 courses. So I had to go to grad school. And so I did. That was the price to pay for deciding my senior year. So that's what brought me to CMU because I did not go to CMU for college. I went there for grad school. So I came to the CMU PhD program, even though, and this is another question you might ask, I only have an ABD, all but dissertation. But I did spend 7 years in the program. But I'll talk to that. Maybe I will talk briefly about that now. Anyway, all right. So I spent 7 years loving it. I loved grad school. I at least loved grad school for about 5 years. It started getting a little old after that, I think. And then I hadn't really thought about what I'm going to do after grad school. And then Microsoft made me an offer that I just couldn't refuse. I had a friend who was working there, David Kurlander, and he introduced me to Edward Jung, who was starting this real exciting new project to transfer technology from Microsoft research into Microsoft products. And to be a part of this opportunity, I just couldn't pass it up. And so I left with my dissertation unfinished, but part of the deal was I could finish it at Microsoft. The only problem there was every opportunity at Microsoft was shinier and brighter and more exciting than my old boring thesis. And so that was essentially that. Plus, I felt like I was leaving academia forever. And so I thought, there's no reason I'll want a PhD, which is rather ironic given that I've spent the last 20 years of my life teaching at CMU. But that's another, you might ask that question. But anyway, that's the road by which I wound up at Microsoft. Also hidden in there along the way, during grad school, I was working for Apple. So both Apple and Microsoft under my belt in some part of my history.
So then after that, we'll go back to the question you suggested. What made you turn back to academia?
Right. Well, so I loved being in industry for a while. It had its warts, but everywhere has its warts. Every job I say has its tax. There's going to be a part of the job you don't like. And anyone who leaves a job because of that, I think is being a little juvenile because what they'll learn in time is every job has that. So I was just fine with that. But as I was establishing myself more, um, and getting, more substantive work, and I found that I was seeing things then at times being asked to do things that they weren't illegal, to be very clear. Absolutely not. But they brought into question personal ethics, where, and I also want to make very clear the Microsoft I'm talking about is from decades ago. It's not the Microsoft of today, which is a different company run by different people. It's a lovely, wonderful company, and I think it was even lovely back then. But they had some practices that were suspect, even internally. Such things as they used to stack rank everyone in a group, and then the person at the top got like a wildly huge bonus. The second person got a half as big bonus, approximately, and so on. So therefore, you might imagine the kind of infighting to get high in that stack rank was extreme, right? They don't do that anymore. They haven't done that forever. There's
Can I
stuff like
hit pause right there for
that.
a second? I'm curious if like you found yourself reverting back to that idea where like just effort, effort, effort when you were in industry, when you were ranked.
Oh, there's no question. Okay. I was working so hard that for a while I would not go home at night, and my wife, my amazing wife, would come in the next morning and bring me fresh underwear and last night's dinner. Okay. And in fact, there's a interesting part of the story. I worked in the building that Bill Gates worked in. At the time, he drove himself in this black Lexus, and the parking lot would be empty when Gretchen, my wife, came in, except for Bill's Lexus. And he would often be leaving because he worked hard, roughly when she was arriving. And there's when there's no cars on campus, maybe he wasn't strictly following the suggested speed limit and were the stop signs. And so they a couple times came close to colliding. And I always told her, if you did hit him, you have to make 2 phone calls quickly. Okay. The second one is to 911 because, of course, we care a lot about him and want him to be well. But the first one would be to our stockbroker because we have to sell. Okay. But anyway, the funny thing is, I had learned my lesson as a freshman in college by really destroying myself by trying too hard and ruining the things I cared about. And then I did it to myself again. And everything was great at Microsoft from all my effort until it was horrible. Until I was working too hard, writing checks I couldn't cash, making promises I couldn't keep because there's a limit to human endeavor. And I just maybe it's arrogance, but I was just promising stuff that was more than I could do, which meant I got these great reviews until I got this terrible review because everything broke again. And either my desire to contribute more, or maybe my hubris, or maybe my just desire to be number one on that list, whatever it was, it really led to another major fall. Now I got up again, dusted myself off, and found my balance again. And I did not leave the company because of that. Um, I didn't leave Microsoft. I left industry. I'd had my fill of it. The problem with large industries, such as I think of it, is not that they're not ethical. The problem is that their ethics are the ethics of making money. As long as it's legal, let's maximize profits. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying it's not for me. I want to maximize helping people and then try to make enough profits. And I run into that problem at CMU, by the way. Okay. Because at CMU, I think nearly every faculty member has their own way of saying it, but some version of what I just said. We're all here for the students, and we're all here for the teaching. We're all here for the research, for the ones who do that. And then, of course, you need to make profits, or else we wouldn't exist. But we're not here for the profits. Like, those are the side effect. The effect is the teaching and the research. But there are those who view this as an industry. And in industry, you have to maximize profits. And those are competing visions of how to run something. But I will tell you, in industry, there were not competing visions. There was just maximize profits. And I found that led to some very discouraging outcomes. Like, for example, I made this really, really cool feature, if I dare say so. Okay. And I don't have to go very much into it, but I spent a year of my life in 1996 building this thing. And when I was done, I thought it was going to go directly into Windows and be this awesome thing for everybody. But it didn't. Not because it didn't work, not because people didn't want it. But at the time, Windows had near monopolistic numbers. Now, no one would ever say that. The word monopoly is a swear word when you're in industry, right? So no one says it. But that's what it was. And so it was explained to me, sure, it would be nice if we shipped this, but it will cost us money to ship it, to bring it up to shipping standards, because I had a prototype to, and maintain it. And we're not going to get any more sales because we already have all the sales we can get. So it's cost without benefit. And I said, wait. I agree with the cost, but the benefit is people. People get to use this cool thing. And they're saying that is not how we measure benefit. We measure benefit by profits. And but profits are not benefit. It's a different, and like they felt I was utterly naive in saying these words. And maybe even some weird way I was, right? Because after all, Bill Gates became a multi-billionaire by focusing heavily on profits. And then, to his amazing credit, Bill Gates gave away more money than anybody else in the history of the universe. But he couldn't have done that without his maniacal focus on profits. So it's complicated, which is where I'm not getting judgy. I'm not, but I'm saying it wasn't for me. And it was time for me to go do what was for me. The other thing was we just had our second child, and it was a perfect time to go back to where our family was. I married into a Pittsburgh family, and raise our kids around family, and to just reconsider, what do I want in life? And I got to tell you, I was never unhappy really at Microsoft or Apple, except for particular moments that make for good stories, but mostly not. It just wasn't giving me the deep satisfaction I had hoped for. And I got it right because it only took me 35 years to figure it out, but teaching does it. Teaching is the thing that brings joy and passion to my professional life. And it took me 35 years to figure it out, but I did.
So, just before we dive into kind of your teaching style and your thoughts on teaching, I'd love to go back to something you said about maximizing profits and incentives. So, with kind of this development of AI and AI systems, like if the goal is not understanding or is not fully altruistic in the sense that they're trying to help or ship a product that helps people, like how do we think about this profit component in the development of AI? Like, is it a problem if there are perverse incentives with the development of AI?
It's an excellent question. I don't have the definitive answer. Uh, I will say we should never, ever believe any company ever if they present themselves as wanting to help. It's just not what a corporate motive is. Neither do they want to hurt. Okay, that's what they want to do. What they have to do is make money, and that's what's driving them. And that doesn't mean that they're not full of really good people. They might be, but as a corporation, the goal is to make money. And all these large corporations right now who are pursuing with trillions of dollars at this point, AI, they are not pursuing it because AI is going to cure cancer and help us, solve global warming. Those are motivations, but the main motivation is AI is going to displace workers and in the process save tons of money, which then the AI firms are going to be able to charge tons of money for that. So there's a huge amount of money to be made from this, and they're chasing that pot of gold. Um, I don't blame them. People have chased pots of gold and created amazing things. Like all the technology that's made our life better is from those motivations, right? So it's not a problem per se. The problem becomes when the technology itself is injurious. Okay. And AI is deeply complicated because it's deeply injurious in some ways already, even while, of course, it's powerful and helpful in other ways and will be more helpful. So that's why I say I don't have an answer except to respect it's complicated, and we should believe essentially nothing that anyone from any of those companies says ever. They have trillions of dollars of incentives to tell us partial truths and overly rosy predictions.
That's a fair answer. So transitioning into kind of teaching, I'm curious. I just took your class 15112, and it was very different from a lot of typical college courses as I thought of it, but also just courses in general. And so you're obviously very intentional with what you do, and I'm sure there's a lot of thought that goes behind why you structure the lectures in the way that you do, why the like homework is set up the way that it is. So I'm curious, what's something that you do in your courses that most students realize or don't realize is very intentional?
Okay. It's a very good question. Um, so to begin with, I say there's small things I do that that maybe are pretty obvious, but maybe they're not. Like you might have noticed once in a while, I'll swear in lecture. Okay. Um, I am deliberately now. It's not just a show. Okay. I'm sure you'll agree. Just talking to me now, there's like conversational me and there's lecture me, and I think they're like different people. I assume this persona, I guess. Yeah. I don't put on an act. I just become this other person. But but the swearing is meant to do a few things, f bombs and so forth. It's meant to first just straight up put a jolt of energy in the room. It is unbelievable how reliable you can just push this button and there's just instantly a little jolt of energy. But also, I want to send some messages. I want to say, we're not in high school anymore. You can't do that in high school. And a lot of my students were in high school just a few months earlier, like you. Okay. And I want to send a strong message. We're in effing college now. You're an adult and we can do whatever adults do, which includes swearing. Okay. So it's a almost childish way of making an important point, right? And the other thing is, I want to make the point that we own the experience in this room. We can make it fun. We can make it boring. There are very few rules. Okay. There's some. Okay. But there's very few rules on what can be said and done in this room. And if it turns out to be a dry, boring experience, that's all of our faults, but chiefly mine. And so, like, all of that's wrapped up in this very intentional decision to swear. Now, by the way, I didn't sit and think about that. What I did was my first semester teaching at CMU went terribly poorly. Okay. Uh, to the point where I was going to leave. But that seems to be like a story of my life. Always like the first time I do things, not so great. And I can tell if you want some fabulous stories about that, but they all end poorly.
No,
And I
please
was
do.
gonna
I'd love to hear a story about this.
so I'll come back to that in a sec, but let me
Okay, okay.
tell to answer this question. So I was gonna leave, and then Mark Stellick, who hired me, and he's amazing. And all my important things I've done at CMU, I've done with Mark. Right. So Mark and I co-founded 15112. Mark and I co-founded CMU CS Academy, uh, and Mark's the one who hired me. So um, he said, maybe don't leave, but try one more time. He was my Archie Epps, right? Like if you recall from the dean who kept me in college, and he said, stay here, but be more thoughtful about what you're doing. So I went to the College of Teaching because they don't have one at CMU. When they hire you, they don't teach you how to teach. So I identified the best teachers that I knew of, the best faculty, and that was, among others, Mark Stellick, John Mackey. And then I studied them. I watched them lecture. Watched their office hours. I studied how they taught. And I was amazed at first how unbelievably talented they were. But also, there was just some steady themes that came through. And like Mark, by the way, who grew up in Queens, I believe, he has the kind of vocabulary that might go with that, as he would say. And I saw how it was working well, and it just kind of seeped into my practice from that. But there were larger things. What I learned from Mark and John is every day wake up obsessing about your students. Make every decision about your students. Now, that doesn't mean make decisions to be popular. I will make decisions that I know as I'm making them are going to make me unpopular. Okay. You've been in the room sometimes where I've had to do things that I know people didn't love I was doing, even if they might have understood why I was doing it. Um, but I felt in my bones that it was what I had to do to help those students. And you have to put your students first, no matter what. Now, that might sound pie in the sky. It might sound, I don't know, like you can't translate into direct action. But it turns out it's the exact opposite. It turns out to be a great guide. So, for example, recently we graded a quiz. This was last semester, and the quiz was hard to grade. And so our TAs, our amazing staff that had budgeted 2 hours, had just spent 3 hours in the room grading this quiz, which was all the time we had for it. And then when we were done, we discovered that we had graded it wrong. So what do you do in that circumstance? You could drop the quiz. You could I don't know, have a new quiz. But from the student's perspective, what's the best thing to do? Regrade the quiz. So we ordered more food and we just stayed there for hours more and we regraded the quiz. And they were endlessly apologetic to our staff, but the students come first. And if you have that belief, it's amazing how everything else just follows. And so then I got that. I'm not laying claim to that. That's Mark Stellick, that's John Mackey, and I learned it from them. But and then you have to be yourself. Don't pretend to be someone else. Like, teach as yourself. Let yourself come through. So other things I learned is that you have to teach the whole student. And like, there are faculty who would disagree with me, and they have every right to. Okay. They say, my job is to teach you statistics, or my job is to teach you math, or my job is, in my case, to teach you for loops. But if, let's say that you actually believe that, and my only job is to help you, Charlie, you learn how for loops work. Okay. And then you're not learning how for loops work. Okay. And now I could just say, look, I've lectured on it. I gave you practice sessions. I've done my part. Too bad. Like, toughen up. But I believe fundamentally you're not teaching unless someone's learning. So if you're not learning, I'm not teaching. I'm trying to teach, but I'm failing to teach. And then that becomes my problem. So then I call you in and talk to you. And then I find out that you're not sleeping more than 2 hours a night, that you have extreme stress in your life because maybe a family member is very ill, or maybe 100 other things, or 1,000 other things. And these are the reasons why you're not performing well in my class. Now, what I could do is I can say, I'm not a psychologist, not my job. Okay. And I'm not, by the way, and to be really clear, I'm really not. And faculty need to be very careful not to play psychologist on TV. Okay. Because bad things would happen. But there's a huge gulf between psychologists professionally trained to help and don't give a shit, I'm only teaching you for loops. Okay. And like, you got to land in the middle. And you got to try to help as a caring adult in your students' lives. And it's try to counsel, maybe just counseling you to go to CAPS, go get psychological services and get some help. But often it's way more than that, because there is a lot that we can do that you don't need to be a trained professional to do. And it's amazing how helping students through Life 101 helps them suddenly learn for loops better. And so if my job is only to teach for loops, I think I have to teach more than for loops. Okay. And then the other part is, I'll just say the experience to me is just as a human thing. I love helping students work through these kinds of issues. I just do. I love watching them grow from the kind of younger, weaker versions of themselves, just like I went through, into the more mature, more successful, more capable versions of themselves, which is why I focus on freshman year. I've taught other levels. Freshman year is where the joy is for me. As for stories about the disaster that occurred, wait, I'm sorry to skip around. One more thing. About how we teach 112, since you asked that. I have co-taught 112 with some of the best faculty ever to teach at CMU. Okay. And one after another, just a series of the top award winners and most treasured faculty. So I have been incredibly fortunate in that regard. But the reason I say that is I've had this discussion with all of them. We've tried to dream up, how do you teach 112 well? Of course we did. And our answer at the end of the day is unbelievable, I think. It's, we don't know. We actually don't know how to teach, how to think, because it's a course about how to think about, like, in a different way, right? It's a course about problem solving and thinking computationally. And changing how someone thinks, you can't just tell them. It doesn't absorb. We have a lot of technical information we tell you, but that doesn't change how you think. The one thing that does is volumes and volumes of hard problems, and then lots of time working through those problems, spending time with TAs, going to office hours. And what you're doing is slowly retraining your mind, and you're training yourself how to think. And at the end of the day, I hate to say it, but the secret to 112 is volume. Okay. It's really volume, really smart students, and awesome TAs. That's the mix. And so our job is to just promote that mix. And I wish I had something more exotic, because it's not a very complicated answer, as it turns out, but it also seems to work. And AI, of course, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this in a while, but AI nearly destroyed that model. But we've even made it somewhat AI proof so that, um, so I think there's still hope for the model. Now, my first semester at CMU, I was teaching a sophomore level course, and students, it was the course long ago is discontinued. But it's some combination of what today might be thought of as 122 with little pieces, maybe slices of maybe 251, maybe, um, but mainly 122, I'd say. Was taught in Java, and was given a list of prerequisites the courses students took and what they know coming in, and post requisites, what they needed to know when they left. It was a very aggressive course, as CMU is. And so I planned so fastidiously. I was ready, and we were going to get students all the way there. And in the first lecture, I'm giving this lecture, and I'm realizing, oh my gosh, they don't know what they were supposed to know when they came in this room. Okay. And now you've got to make a decision what you're going to do about that. Because there were gaping holes. And so my first assignment, they had no hope of being able to do. None. Okay. Now, you could say, I'm going to hold the line. Okay. And in other words, the thing that's most important to me is doing what I was told to do from the university. Okay. And that's what I did. I thought that was the right thing to do. That's before I went to the school of Mark and John, because had I put my students first, I would have said, I'm willing to suffer not doing what the university told me, because it's in the best interest of my students that I not do that and do something else, even if I take heat later on. But I didn't do that. And so what happened was I essentially brutalized them, right? Because like they on their own had to learn all these hard topics. We weren't teaching it to them. We had almost no office hours. Thank you very much. We had very few TAs, and and so the strong among them managed to learn it, and the weaker among them disappeared. And it's all my fault. It gets better. So so um, in lecture, students were already getting pretty distracted back then with computers and whatnot, and I let them do that. Okay. Of course, I don't let anyone do that anymore. Um, I knew in my heart it was bad for them, but I didn't want to be that guy who's like the enforcer or whatever it was. And I wanted them to be adults who can make adult decisions. And it turns out that 18 and 19-year-olds are sometimes adults and sometimes not. And sometimes they need rules to help encourage them to be adults. And then when they follow those rules, they see the sense in them afterwards. But I didn't do that. And I just let them do that, which meant that a lot of them weren't even absorbing lecture. Okay. And didn't have an attendance policy. So a lot of them weren't even showing up. But it gets worse. So now we're well into the semester, and everything about the course doesn't feel good. Okay. Everything. It's just clearly a bad course, poorly taught. And then I give the hardest assignment of the semester was they're supposed to make a first class extension to what's called the Java collection framework. None of that matters except for this. It's very hard to do. And even though we tested it ourselves doing it, the way we tested it was the right way. And what we didn't realize was there are many wrong ways. And those wrong ways would tickle bugs in the JCF itself, because the JCF was new and a little buggy. And if you had when I say a wrong way, a sensible way, but it's not going to work. And it'll never work, not because of you, but because of bugs in Java itself. So we unleashed the homework on them. And to that point, I don't think I made a major mistake. It was a good, hard problem that was well tested. The mistake came when my TAs, because I only had a couple, contacted me on whatever, maybe it was Thursday. And they said, office hours is not normal and you need to do something about this. And then I just ignored that. And then on Friday, I started getting an email, office hours are a disaster, help. And then I got an email, help. And then I got an email, help, 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 help. And so I got to admit, I was irritated. I mean, I'm not proud of this story. I was just not a good teacher. I was irritated and I drove to CMU to deal with whatever this was. When I get there, um, Ween Hall, because Gates didn't exist back then. Ween Hall was full of my students in the lab, and they'd been there for a long time, and they were all running into these bugs, and there's like hostility in the air. The air actually smelled bad from people being in a room for too long. Okay, they could have showered a little more, I think. Uh, and and my TAs are there, and they're just mystified. And so I took my two TAs and the top student in the class and me, and the four of us sat there, and I said, we're just going to debug your work. And we sat there from Friday night till breakfast Saturday. And the room was full of people watching us. Okay. And it was performative debugging for hour after hour. And at the end, I had boxed it in and I had firmly established the bug was actually not the students. It was in the JCF. In other words, I'd firmly established that the 20 or 30 hours the student had put in was for naught, and they will never, ever get it to work no matter what. Okay. So already that's bad, but here's where it gets horrible. The question now is, okay, what do you do about it? Okay. And, like the teacher that I am now, not that I'm great or whatever, but I'm different. I would hope I would avoid the problem. I would have had an army of TAs helping you from the start. I would have responded on that Thursday. But let's say we got all the way to the end. Okay. What would you do about students who put 20 or 30 hours in? There's no good answer. They're wrong, but they put enormous effort in. Right. I don't know what I'd do, to be honest. It's weird. But what I would not do is what I did. I just announced, well, you all put this time in and it's not going to work. So we're just going to drop this homework. And that was a dreadful mistake. And I did it after talking to a dean who told me this is what you should do. So at least I had the insight that I should talk to a dean. But what I didn't have the insight of is I should ignore the dean and do what's right. So time and again, we keep get back into do what's right for your students, not what you're being told to do, not like, and like imagine if we just said, we're going to double the value of the homework and anyone who verifiably put in over 20 hours gets 100 on it, which I think is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. You're not giving away points for free. You're just measuring a different thing, but you're giving credit somewhere for that heroic effort. So anyway, net is I got absolutely pummeled in the FCEs, as you'd imagine. And FCEs are complicated. Like to me, the best teachers are not always the one who get the best FCEs because teaching is not a popularity contest. The best teachers are the ones who teach the best, whose students go on and do the most good in the world afterwards. But they're not unrelated, right? And I just got pummeled. And I was like, okay, I'm no good at this. And Mark's the one who just told me, like, he doesn't know who was teaching, but it wasn't me. It was some Martian who took over because like I wasn't being me. At no point had I left my fingerprints on that course, which is true. I could have just been anyone, and I had to and I had to become me to teach. And so that was a lesson learned. Other lessons are, if I insist that balance matters and like I have to create a course where that's true. I mean, we had other stupid mistakes. We had homeworks due as you came into class. But what that meant is students stayed up all night doing the homework. So it's just built into the schedule, right? So now we never do that. Homeworks are due the night before. And even at midnight wasn't healthy. So now, we moved to 8 p.m. And students complain, I want more time than that to do the homework. And so, but that gets back to the popularity contest. I'm sure you do. It's due at 8 p.m. Now go have a good evening. Hang out with your friends and don't do this. So, but it all started from growing from weakness, not from strength.
Okay, yeah. That's a fantastic story. Wow, it's quite the evolution, I guess. So just FYI, it's 9:26 as an aside. I know you need to like go very soon, so I'm
I
gonna try
hadn't
to.
checked. I'm actually on my phone here checking while we're talking. If you have time, I can go a bit longer.
I can go a bit longer for sure.
Okay, cool.
Okay, fantastic. So now let's transition into technology. You mentioned you have kind of this love-hate relationship. Obviously, you're teaching CS, but no computers in the course. So I'd love to hear a bit more about that because that seems coming in my opinion, as a little unconventional. I wasn't expecting that. And then also the role of AI and how it's changing the way that you're teaching.
Cool. Well, you asked an easy question and a hard question. Okay. So the computers in the classroom, by that, when you said no computers in class, you meant in the classroom.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So when you're in the front of a classroom lecturing, and I don't mean in front of 10 people, I mean a large classroom, hundreds of people, it's very easy to feel pockets of low energy. Okay. Um, and almost always in the center of that pocket of low energy is a student messing around on a phone or a computer, like invariably. And and so I talked to colleagues about this years ago, and we were talking about different ideas on how to handle it. And a lot of my colleagues who teach upper division courses say they're adults, it's their problem. Okay. And I don't blame them for that. At some point, that has to be the line. But the question is, at what point does that have to be the line? Maybe faculty who chiefly teach freshmen should try to impart good practices. And so I convinced myself, and Mark convinced me, that that's the better answer. Uh, okay, so then I sat in the back of Rashid sometimes, and I actually took videos of students using their computers. And then I sat and reviewed those videos. And what I found was essentially nobody ever was using their computer to actually enhance their lecture experience, either taking notes or trying to like experiment with something that they just said. They might do that on occasion, but as a trend, everyone's just farting around on their computers. That's what they're doing. They're checking their email, they're checking their instant messages, they're just thumbing through pictures. Um, and the thing is, it's unbelievably destructive to the classroom experience. There's science and you can go find it, but you don't need science. Just stand in the front of the classroom and you can feel this drain coming. And the problem is, it's twofold. If it was just hurting you, even that I wouldn't accept, but other people could accept. But it's hurting the people around you because you're creating this energy drain around you and this distraction. And you just don't have the right to do that. And so that's how I led to this policy, 15 years ago. Okay. Um, but the problem now is the world's changed. And now people almost can't breathe without their phone. Okay. And they're so addicted to their phones. And I'm very worried for your generation that you're starting to lose basic bits of humanity. You walk down the hallways and you see people at a table across from each other, but they're not talking to each other. They're both right, and like that's the definition of antisocial. Okay, um, and and so there's a shallowness to experience when you're not. Oh, when we spend a lot of money and you go to a show like my wife and I went for my 60th birthday to New York, and we went to a show, and we went to the US Tennis Open. And so we spent real money to experience lovely things, and they were lovely. Okay. There were people there who were watching it through their phone. They're recording it, and they're not watching at all. They're watching their phone. And so I can't fix this. I'm not going to pretend that I can suddenly reverse a societal trend, but I sure as hell can fix it in my classroom. And I can help students understand that you can have a richer experience if you actually experience it, put your phone down and be part of it, right? And the other thing is there's a hard limit to what kind of problems you're going to be able to solve. Because there's only so many problems that can be solved with 15, 20 minutes of thought. There's a lot of problems that require you to not use phones and not use computers and not be distracted and sit and think hard for hours and hours. And if you don't have that skill, that means you can't solve those problems. And so I want to impart in students this ability for them to decide when they're going to be focused. It's not that phones are evil. Very few things are evil. Some things are evil. I think we can all agree on that, but very few things. It's just that it's very easy to let phones dictate to you how you're thinking and living as opposed to you dictating it to them, which is where the policy continues now. I could never imagine teaching ever again and allowing students to be using electronics in the classroom. And it's not, it's, it just comes from my core belief that they're going to grow as people by learning to manage that technology. And that's a role that I have to play for them. Okay. And at times it's distinctly unpopular. Like, what do you do when it's the seventh time that you've told someone? At that point, telling them is doing nothing. So I have removed people from a classroom, which, let me tell you, when you do that, like like it is not a fun day for anybody. Okay. So I do that as a last resort. And I don't do it to punish the student, even though I'm sure everyone in the room thinks so. I do it to send a message to everyone else. We are committed to making this right for all of us. This matters. You matter to you, and you have to hold yourself to a higher standard. That's the message I'm trying to send. Anyway. So AI. All right. So to begin with, AI is the ultimate, most complicated technology in computer science. It is like the nuclear power of computer science, right? Because nuclear power can do amazing good for the world and unspeakable bad for the world. Uh, and AI is that way. So you can't say AI is good and you can't say AI is bad. Both of those positions are naive. Um, but my question isn't, is AI good or bad? My question is, how does AI influence my students' learning? Because I am chartered with teaching them this stuff. And the answer is, left unregulated, it's devastatingly destructive. And that's what we learned in the spring of 25, last semester. Okay. Uh, so this course had been running for 20 years and had been very successful, 10,000 students, yada, yada. And then AI came along. And that was the first semester where AI was really used like by everybody. And the results were just shockingly horrible. We had dramatically more drops and fails than we've ever had before. We had dramatically fewer A's. We had 90% reduction in TA use, in office hours use, in we call ED, this online platform we use. 90% reduction because students were not asking our TAs, they were asking AI. Now, AI does not teach you, it just gives you the answer. And that turns out to be the exact opposite of teaching you. Not only does it not teach you, but it prevents you from having the motivation to be taught. You have the answer and you just move on with your life. So AI is profoundly destructive. The ultimate destruction was measured at the end of the semester when we had our term projects. And out of 400 plus projects that came into us, maybe 3 met historic norms that they were what we would consider projects. And none of this was cheating, by the way. Students were allowed to use AI. In previous semesters, it was cheating, and it became very apparent. Calling it cheating is the wrong answer. Everyone's using AI, and we need to embrace it, not fight it. Okay. But we embraced it the wrong way that semester. And so when you have tons of drops, you have no one using your resources, you have no one learning well, and then you have no projects that are even like projects. Like, I would say the course rotted to the core. The course was horrible. And if that happened even one more semester, to be blunt, I would quit. Okay. You're not teaching if people aren't learning, and those students were not learning. Okay. And I would not put them through that. And also, I would tell CMU, you cannot ask for as much money as you are asking for, and then just completely fail to teach your students. So, so I viewed it as a existential moment for at least for my relationship with teaching. And 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 then as it turns out, the a lot of the fixes were just very simple. We didn't radically change everything. The course you took at a distance looks and feels just like the one from before. Same topics, same problems. So the changes were simply these. Um, well, before I even say them, I guess I should say we made lists and lists of possible changes, and we talked to like every faculty member you could imagine, and like some things were more enforcement oriented, like let's get really good at catching you using AI, and I just those really turned me off both because I don't believe they work well, but also because I just don't believe police states are the way to solve this. So let's try to find policies and procedures that work to your benefit without you feeling forced to do it. Okay. And that also, by the way, leads me to one more point about why AI is so corrosive. I believe in the goodness of people. I do. I think some people are horribly bad, but most of them know they're bad. They um so that's a general thing. I believe in humanity. And I believe in my students that they want what's best for them and the people around them as a general rule. There are exceptions, but that's the general rule. They show up wanting to learn. So what the hell went on that hundreds of students who wanted to learn failed to learn? They did not use AI to cheat. That is not what happened. They thought they were helping themselves. That's what happened. And so AI is so seductive because it feels like this magic shortcut that just makes you stronger, faster, better, and at less effort on your part. But you're not that you're cutting corners and learning less. You get better results with less effort. If that was true, you would be a fool not to use AI. And so it's this seductiveness. It's like a drug. And we know it's like a drug because afterwards, when we talk to students about what went wrong, we talk to dozens and dozens of them over and again, they use this language of, I'm addicted to it. Please help me stop. Okay. All right. So, so here's some things we did. The first thing we did is um, we, as a rule, don't believe anything that we haven't seen with our own eyes. And that is to say, I don't think you cheated on your homework. Remember, I don't. I'm not playing games. But I have no way of knowing which students over relied on AI accidentally, naively, not cheating. So don't say that completing homework means you know it. So that's where writing sessions came from. You have to reproduce your homework in a proctored setting. And that comes from Anil Adan 15251, where they've been doing that for years. Uh, and that alone, like there are students who got hundreds on the homework and walked in and got zeros on the writing session. And then they tell me, "Oh, I just don't test well." But it's not a test. Like you know what's on it. It's like that just means you didn't understand your own homework, and the message sank in, and people started not maybe using AI less at least, but at least studying their homework more. um, all exams are on paper, so there's no opportunity to use AI during a quiz or exam. It's all on paper. And then the last major change was we flipped the classroom so that what we used to lecture, we put into videos. And then what we used to call homework, half of that we just did in class. Now you might say, wait, doing homework for your students, that's no better than AI. I know you wouldn't say that, but someone might say that. Uh, and the answer is it's a hell of a lot better because we're going to walk through the problem solving process. And you still have to go leave the room and reproduce it yourself. Plus, there's problems we're not going to do that on. But at least we guaranteed you're going to see a lot of how to solve, which is not as good as you doing it yourself, but it's a damn lot better than not doing it and not seeing it. And these changes collectively so far have worked. Um, this semester actually outperformed most recent semesters. And there's no question it's back up to historic norms. And my sense is students had some fun along the way. I know the staff had a great staff cohesion. I, my wife was really concerned for me and my colleagues that AI was taking the joy out of teaching. And nope, the joy is back in teaching. So we still have work ahead for us, especially because AI is getting better all the time and even calls into question at some point, should 112 even exist? Which is an interesting question. But right now, yes, it should. Okay. And right now we have a recipe that works for the current and probably near term changes in AI. So AI nearly destroyed us. We responded, and so far, so good. As for the should 112 exist, I think we're at the point right now that we are like with self driven cars. Okay. Have you ever been in a self driven car?
Once, yes,
Yes.
the
I also did
Waymos.
it once. Did you like I thought it was simultaneously very cool and very unsettling.
Yes, couldn't agree more. Yes,
Um, I also claim that even though cars can drive themselves right now, everyone should still also learn how to drive. I hope you would agree with that.
I would agree with that.
Well, it's exactly the same way with coding right now. Right now, you have self coding, like self driving cars, you have AI can code, but not well enough to fully replace coders any more than self driving cars are replacing drivers. You can imagine a future where that's true. In fact, you can easily imagine that. But it's a future. It's not here. It's not now. It's not next year. In the present, there's just no way. Not only can it not, it's not knocking on that door. Okay. And the fact that that self-driving car you were in could stop at a red light and make a nice turn and merge didn't change you from saying people should be learning to drive right now. So the fact that AI can make a beautiful answer to a problem from 15112 also doesn't change that. And the reason is because AI still right now can be deeply flawed. It can make bad mistakes. How will you even know that if you don't know how to code? If you're just using AI blindly, you'll have no way to fix those mistakes either, will you? Okay. So the answer is, so Zico Coulter, who's head of our machine learning department and is very forward facing in all of this AI. And actually, he's a friend of 15112. And as you know, he's come and spoken to 15112 students about this. He makes the strong point, and he's highly informed, that AI is great at helping you do things you can already do so that you can do them faster and better. But AI is dangerous for having you do things you cannot do. And that's where we are right now in AI, which tells me in the near term, we must keep teaching this and teach it well, even though I can easily imagine a future where someday it goes the way of lots of old technologies, right? Um, and then lastly, I've talked recently with some pretty senior people at large tech companies that do a lot of hiring. And to a person, they said they still desperately need to hire like world class developers, world class technical talent. But that talent now must also be really good at AI. They're looking for the marriage of these two things, not the replacement. If it was a replacement, they wouldn't hire you at all. They don't need you to type prompts in. They can do that without you. Okay, they need you to do is type the right prompts at the right times and know how to handle the results and to bring meaning to them and to catch the flaws and to bring humanity to the whole thing.
I like your analogy about the self-driving cars. I will just posit a kind of a follow-up question or like an assertion or a claim. I would say that learning to drive, you learn some skills, right? But learning to code, you're not only like learning the skill to code, but you're also learning the thinking. And I think that's something you really emphasized with the class. And part of what really resonated with me was that above all, you're learning how to think and problem solve. And that skill applies to coding, but it also applies to everywhere else in your life.
I'm in a position of having to agree with you. Uh, so in 15112, we have about 1,000 students a year, but only about 75 to 100 are CS majors. So we teach overwhelmingly students from lots of different majors. And this is going to shock you, but a lot of our business majors and a lot of our decision science majors and a lot of our science majors don't go on to become software engineers. Okay. But I keep in touch with a lot of former students, and I'm just doubling down on what you just said. They time and again tell me, I am a vice president at Morgan Stanley, and I never code, but I use the ideas from 112 all the time in my job. And that's what you just said. Right. So once you get really good at analytical problem solving, you can't go back. Like, you're going to use that approach to address problems for the rest of your life with or without a computer. So I completely agree, and the point of what you're saying, I believe, is, um, if we stop teaching 112 because AI can solve these problems, where are students gonna learn these analytical problem-solving skills? And I don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah, so I could talk about AI with you for hours, but we don't have that time. So I have two more questions before we round out our conversation. Um, that I'm excited to hear your answers for. So CMU has a tradition of the fence, right? It's this fence in the middle of campus where people paint over it, clubs, organizations paint over it. If you were to place a phrase, quote, idea, anything that you would want to share to campus that could fit on the fence, what would you paint on it and why?
It's a really good question. Um, I think you know my answer, okay? Uh, but I'll start with saying CMU can come across as a very non-political environment. There are certain campuses that tend to be more political. Uh, and I'm not saying being political is good or bad, but I am saying caring about other people and trying to help other people is good. Fundamentally, capital G, good. Okay. And it turns out CMU students do that. They're just kind of quiet about it. So I have over the years watched CMU students do things like global business brigades where they go down to Central America and try to impart more business ability, strategies to impoverished people to pull them out of poverty. I have amazing stories to tell about that. CMU students who I was affiliated with a group that's trying to help blind children in rural India learn Braille so that they could have some hope at a productive life. We've helped um, uh, uh, a school for orphans from the genocide in Rwanda. Um, and I go on and on and on. CMU students are amazing, but they're quietly amazing about it. And I'd like them to be more vocally amazing about it, which would encourage others to join in. Because I'll tell you, my experience is having worked with students who've done stuff like that. Years later, when you talk to them, they remember 112. They remember they took 112. They don't remember anything about 112 except like high order things, right? Like, okay, it was hard. And there were TAs are amazing. And they got some friends out of the course. And maybe they remember their term project. There are whole courses they don't remember they took at all, but they can talk endlessly about that trip to Central America or that trip to Rwanda and the impact it made, that not just that they made on other people's lives, but the impact it made on their lives. And I would love to create this community where more people were doing that. And so maybe words like care or but like that doesn't get to the heart of it. And that gets back to what I say when I sign my emails and my posts. I picked this up from Henry Leitner, my favorite instructor in college. And he used to, in his emails, sign them Carpe Diem. And he picked them up, as I understand it, from an instructor of his. And Carpe Diem means seize the day. And this gets back to your first question, I believe, about intentionality. The reason I sign Carpe Diem over and over is to start planting a seed. And through repetition, I want students to get very used to hearing this and thinking it. And then I explain to them what it means over time. So when seize the day, you can choose your own meaning for what that means. But for me, what it means is we are all flawed characters. We are. That's what it just means to be human. And by that, I mean, we have this noble sense of our ideal self. I am the person who helps people. I am the person who studies well. I am the person who's there for my friends. And then we have the sad reality of our actual selves that it just doesn't match up. And Carpe Diem comes down to each day, try to take one step towards that ideal version of yourself. Be very thoughtful. If you think you're the kind of person who helps people who are hungry, do it today. If you want to be the kind of person who is a brain surgeon and helping people that way, but you're not motivated to study for the upcoming biology exam. Like, you gotta snap those 2 together and understand your greater sense of who you are, your mission in life depends on you studying for that, not because you want to. And, like, snapping together your long-term, like, the things that really matter to you with your day-to-day life. Because what happens otherwise is we get so caught up in the urgent that we lose track of the important. You get so caught up in homework 3 and quiz 4 and midterm 2 and this paper and in that, mind you, that's only because 'cause you're very caring and you're just trying to do well, but then at the end of a semester, if you list the things you actually care about, you realize you just didn't do much about any of them. So it's being aware of where you're trying to get in life, what matters most to you, and attending to that at least a little bit while you're also attending to the mayhem of daily life, especially for a student at CMU. So that's why I would put carpe diem on the fence.
Fantastic answer. And I think this next question is going to dive into that a little bit more. It's kind of a two-pronged question, and I think in answering the first one, you're going to answer the second one. But when I just say the word successful, who's the first person that jumps into your mind? And then a subset of that question is, how do you personally define success?
That turns out to be really easy. Okay. Uh, so I'm going to first dodge it by saying something I do in class almost every semester. I think I did it your semester. I ask students to think about someone who they hold in the highest regard. And I wait till they all do. I says, it can't be anyone you know here at CMU. It's got to be someone outside. And then once they know, I ask them, all right, what I ask them is, what's their GPA? And, and of course, nobody knows. Right. And then the point I'm trying to make is you all are obsessing on GPA, but GPA is not how you're judging people. So it should not be how you judge yourself. It's it's not that it's not important. I didn't say that. It's just not a way to judge someone. You judge someone by their character. You judge someone you judge someone by however you want, but most people judge people by their character. Okay. Um, and so for me, who I think are the most successful people would be my Uncle Mike and Aunt Holly. Okay. Um, so Uncle Mike, they're retired now. Heck, I'm old enough that I should probably be retired. And but they only retired recently. And actually, Holly still works a bit. Um, but Mike was a sportscaster for years. And then he worked for the Red Sox, Boston Red Sox. He worked on their marketing side, especially through their AAA affiliate. Um, and Holly is a cashier. Okay, and before that, she's a teacher. Um, so if you want to judge in dollars and cents, they are in dollars and cents successful, but not wildly successful. So, but if you want to judge in anything that matters, like like everyone who meets them falls in love with them, adores them. Everyone they have hearts of gold. Uh, when when I am dealing with people, I think, what would Mike do? What would Holly do? And they are my inspiration because I'm just not as good as they are. And I mean, again, capital G good. I'm not, but they inspire me to bring out the best of myself. Okay. And I can be concrete with that. And first, this is worth talking about more because this is it. This is what life's about. Um, Mike had access to some of the top talent, sports talent in the Northeast, right? So he could hang with like the famous people making the $100 million a year. And what did he use that for? He would use it for things like putting together golf tournaments with these pros to raise money for cancer research. He never once used it for personal benefit. Never once. Mike ran the Rhode Island Senior Olympics by himself for years and years, okay, without taking a penny for it, just because it was the right thing to do. And if you've never gone to a Senior Olympics, go, because it's hardly, there's very little in life more inspiring than that. Um, so when one time I went to visit by surprise and they weren't home. So I went to a nearby restaurant that they frequent, a pub. and I went to the pub, and I was looking for them, and I couldn't find them. And so someone asked me, "Who are you looking for?" I said, "Mike Lyons." And says, "Oh, you want to find Mike Lyons?" And before I knew it, like 30 people are calling people, and someone like drove off somewhere else to find him. And eventually they found him. And it wasn't even an emergency. But the question is, how many people would have that reaction? Okay. And then one last one was my family was traveling to Costa Rica, and we were in the middle of nowhere, Costa Rica, at this little roadside stand, and we're having some chicken that we bought there, and we're talking about Mike Lyons, and then this couple next to us says, "Wait, like the Mike Lyons from like Providence, that Mike Lyons," and then just gushing about how like he's just been an important part of their life, and like that's crazy, right? Like, what more would you want? What more would anyone want in their life than for random people everywhere who anyone they've gotten near to adore them? Okay. And to think of them as the people who will give anything of themselves for others. And I was inspired many times from this. I'll give you one example. I had a student, and this is not a happy example, but I had a student who was dying of cancer. And actually, he ultimately died. While he was dying, he was in 112, and he, from his hospital bed far away, wanted to keep doing his project. And it just seemed like a lovely way to get his mind off of the reality he was facing. So we worked together on it, and he did a project, and then he passed away. And obviously, it was a very, very sad moment. But then I had to got the invite to the funeral, and the funeral, of course, was like whatever, like the day before our final exam. Is at the worst possible time. It was a 10-hour round trip to go to the funeral, and nobody there was gonna know me. I never met anyone but him. I didn't meet his family members, I didn't meet his doctors, and no one's gonna know, and, like, the only reason to go is for him, but he would understand that I had these other commitments to my other students. So I convinced myself that it was actually practical not to go, that's what I should do. And so I just said, "I'm not going." And then in the morning, I woke up and I could just hear my Uncle Mike talking to me. And to be fair, I think that there was some Mark Stellick in there as well. And it just became very clear to me, you've got to go. You have no choice but to go. And I went. And as it happens, while I had not talked to them, he had. And when I walked in, an aunt came running up to me and said, "You must be David Kosbie, and we were so hoping that you'd be here." And as it turned out, I was able to talk to a lot of them and share stories about him, and it was a lovely time and a very I was very happy I was able to contribute to his memory. But this is not about me being so wonderful and going there. It's actually me being weak and almost not going there, but having the strength from someone better than me to draw from in my uncle. And that to me is the definition of success. He succeeds wildly because he inspires others.